good morning, if not good evening. We're very happy to have people all around the globe here. And of course, there are always some people we might leave out. So for those that usually might join from Latin America, now it's a bit challenging. We realize this, but nevertheless, happy to have a great span of people joining today. So this is the Community of Practice on Water and Climate. In this kind of constellation, newly founded a few months ago. We have different types of format that we want to use to share knowledge, experiences, research on the topic on climate resilience, mitigation related to the broader spectrum management, WASH topics, so water access, sanitation. And this kind of format we call Coffee and Learn sessions. So we are very happy to have experts here to enlighten us with their research, their new findings, and then spread this to the different projects, community members that are within our community. So who are we? This Water and Climate Steering Group is steered by a bunch of people, and some of them are all as well here. So there's next to me, Nadine and Mintje joining us for Anna and Diana being in Latin America. It's a bit hard right now. It's early in the morning, and Frauke is on leave. So this community of practice is kind of a network of 3 sector networks. So we have projects represented in the SOVAS upscaling mainly in Africa. We have Gader Alk projects contributing to this community of practice, and the MENREM WASAM. So in this sense, we call ourselves now a global community of practice, sharing experiences around the globe. Everyone is free to join, and of course we don't have a very mean definition of water, so all kind of different aspects that have to do with water resources as well, nature-based solutions, but of course as well to the classic WASH projects are part of this. Without further ado, today we have the moderation done by Alexandra Dubois, representing SuSanA Secretariat, who will lead us to today's session and introduce as well our experts. So with this, I hand over to Alex. I'm looking forward to the session.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Let me take control now. There we go. So yes, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. As Robert mentioned, my name is Alexandra Dubois, and I work as an advisor in the Water Policy Sector Program. I'm also part of the SuSanA Secretariat, and I will introduce you to the network in a moment. So here we go. The title of our Coffee and Learn session today is Research to Action, Advancing Climate Resilient Urban Sanitation, which means that today we are going to focus a little bit more on sanitation rather than water, and more specifically the interlinkages between climate and sanitation. And yes, that's against this backdrop that we have developed the agenda today. We'll have 45 minutes for 2 presentations and a short Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So it's a bit tight, but yeah, that's not an impossible task. So we have this 45 minutes. I think that's a very good format. But yeah, the risk is that we do not have enough time for question and answer, but please write down your question in the chat. So if we do not manage to save those 10 minutes, the speakers can respond in the chat. So yes, the agenda today is as follows. We'll have a short introduction of the sanitation network, SuSanA, and then it's going to be followed by a summary of the key outcomes of a publication called Climate Resilient Landscape Study, and this publication was carried out by the University of Technology, Sydney. So I'll start with the first presentation, SuSanA. What is SuSanA? Let's start with the name. SuSanA stands for Sustainable Sanitation Alliance, and it is an informal network of sanitation professionals, but also sanitation enthusiasts, whose mission is to contribute to the achievement of the SDGs through sustainable sanitation. And for the one who are working in the field of sanitation for a while now, you probably have encountered the network in one way or another, because it's been around for about 15 years. And in that sense, it's one of the most established network in the sector, as well as one of the largest. And regarding the role and function of SuSanA, there are many. Well, first and foremost, it offers a coordination and discussion platform through its website, susana.org. I think the link is going to be shared with you in a chat in a moment, and I invite you to look at it and scroll through the website. SuSanA also acts as a sounding board, as well as a think tank for new ideas, new projects, new trends in the sector, thanks to this aggregation of experts in the sector. And in the same way, it also contributes to the policy dialogue with a very strong emphasis on sector advocacy activities. And last but not least, it's also a working platform which promotes actively collaborative projects, as well as knowledge exchange and learnings. So what's the link now between SuSanA and GIZ? Well, you've guessed, the network is managed by a secretariat, and this secretariat has been hosted by GIZ since 2008, so basically since its inception. And currently it is located at the Water Policy Sector Program, in which I work, and also Robert. And this program provides the equivalent of around 2.5 full-time experts for the task of the Secretariat. So now maybe a few words about the membership base and the partner organizations. So SuSanA counts more than 15,000 individual members and over 400 partner organizations all around the world. So as I said, it's probably the largest network in sanitation. It includes various categories of members ranging from practitioners, academics, NGOs, private sectors, as well as donors, representatives, etc. And well, yeah, if you're not a member yet, I highly invite you to fill in the form, the registration form. It's free to become a member. It doesn't take more than 3 minutes, I believe, to fill the form. And yeah, you'll get the link in the chat. So yes, what is that the platform, the SuSanA platform offers? The website features a range of tools that are supporting the work of the network, but also the sector in general. And that includes, and that's a non-exhaustive list, it includes a very lively discussion forum with daily posts and daily discussion threads on various topics. It also has a very comprehensive event calendar with the different sector events and activities. And it also features a library, and that's, I think, one of the key features of SuSanA, because it's also one of the largest library on the topic of sanitation. It includes more than 4,000 resources, ranging from research publication, manual fact sheets, videos, podcasts, you name it. And for the context of this community of practice, I would maybe focus a little bit more on the library, because I believe that as GIZ projects, as GIZ staff, I think it's a very important feature, and I really encourage you to make use of the library to not only increase the visibility of the project, but also disseminate further the knowledge products that are being developed within your projects. The library is free, it's accessible to everyone. Unlike IDA, not that we are competing with IDA, but that's something that the SuSanA library offers beyond the scope of GIZ. And something very important also is that thanks to the high traffic on the SuSanA library, or the SuSanA platform in general, resources from the SuSanA library are very well positioned in browser search results, such as Google search. So you have the possibility to also monitor the number of views and the number of downloads, which is one of the best features of the library. And as I mentioned at the beginning, SuSanA is not only a platform to share knowledge and to provide resources. It's also a working platform that encourage collaboration within the community at different level and through different formats. So, for example, to collaborate on technical issues, we have the 13 working groups, which are focusing on various thematic areas such as capacity development, wash and nutrition, technology, sanitation technologies, and even climate. And if we want to collaborate more at regional level or foster regional exchange collaboration at specific regional location, we also have 4 regional chapters, which are also working in parallel to the working group. And last but not least, we also have the discussion forum, which allow for live and in-depth exchange on different topic at worldwide level. And yes, since we are here in the context of the Water Climate Community of Practice, I'll focus also a little bit more on the Working Group 3, which is titled Climate Mitigation and Adaptation. And here you have a screenshot of the Working Group webpage with a short description and the top reads. And I believe that, the link to the Working Group page is being shared with you on the chat. So the working group is currently led by Thorsten Reckertzügel from the German Toilet Organization. It was also co-led by Martin Keres from VACLIM, but now Martin has left the position, so we are actively looking for a co-lead to support Thorsten to lead the working group on climate. So if you're interested, please let us know. And yes, here, to finish my presentation, I'll just briefly mention some example of key products which have either resulted from the working group collaborative effort or to which the working group has contributed to. And that includes the working group 3 fact sheets, which acts more or less as a position paper for SuSanA on the topic of sanitation and climate. So if you haven't read it, I invite you to have a look at it. And we also have key sector publications such as the Climate Resilient Urban Sanitation, which was presented to you or launched, I think, also in this very same community of practice by Mintje, as well as the Shaping the Water Sector to be a more climate resilient publication that's a little bit older now, and more recently the landscape study, which will be presented to you in a bit by our 2 experts from University of Technology, Sydney. And that's actually my transition here. I thank you for your attention. And yes, I will leave the floor to Professor Juliet Willetts and Avni Kumar from the University of Technology, Sydney, who are going to present to us the Climate Resilient Landscape Study. Juliet or Avni, the floor is yours.
Just checking that does that work if I change slides? Yes, wonderful. So I'm Juliet Willetts. It's very lovely to meet you all. Thank you for sparing your time in, I'm sure, what is very busy days to be able to be at this Coffee and Learn session. And as Alex just mentioned, we conducted a study that was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with a report titled Urban Sanitation and Climate Change, a Public Service at Risk. And it's really that issue of it being a public service and at risk that why we think that this area is so important, and we're glad that you're here to hear about it today. And so many people, to begin with, can't quite conceive of exactly how sanitation would be impacted by climate change, but there's a whole range of different mechanisms by which different types of sanitation systems are impacted, whether they're on-site or off-site. And that can be in the circumstance that there's too much water, or equally a whole different set of problems if there's too little water. And it was a recognition of that, and a recognition that the sanitation sector was perhaps a little slow in starting to think about climate change that was the impetus for this study. And the study was done through a set of participatory workshops with more than 60 organisations who included both city and national governments. It included different networks such as SuSanA, included people from GIZ, from many other development agencies, also a set of researchers from different countries, and they all contributed to a set of participatory workshops and online activities that came up with what we'll be sharing with you today. And the main focus of the study was on what is being done, what are some the key challenges, and what could be a knowledge and learning agenda that could help drive more action in this area. So I'm going to briefly talk to the challenges, and then I'll hand to Avni to talk to some examples of good work that I think is leading practice, and then she'll hand back to me to finish off on the knowledge and learning agenda. And we'll try to keep the presentation a bit shorter so that there is time for questions. And we can give the slides to you, so don't worry if you don't quite catch all the detail as we're going. So we've ordered the information into 4 main areas. So the first area is institutions, policy and planning. And in that area, the most significant challenges across these different stakeholder groups, and particularly at the country level, was the lack of coordinated policies and wider integration of climate and disaster and sanitation. And there were a range of other challenges. I'm just going to speak to the headline ones as I walk through today. In the area of financing, the most significant challenge was that budgets at present, they don't really take into account the costs of adaptation, which may create increases both to CapEx and to OpEx. On infrastructure and services, the biggest challenge was, this is quite a broad one, was just a lack of ability to grasp what does it mean to deliver climate resilience, city-wise, inclusive sanitation. That we've already got these different aims to make sure we're delivering services to all across a whole city, but what does it mean to do that and to actually be resilient to these different climate hazards? In terms of the fourth area of users, the biggest challenge was felt, and this was particularly around informal settlements, but in urban areas generally, that it's difficult to have accessible data from the community level about the local conditions, about what sanitation systems are in place or are not, and what the experiences are of those households in the situation of different climate hazards. So from there, we'll move to more positive stories, and I'll hand to Avni to talk through focus areas for resilient sanitation.
Thank you, Juliet. And I've just taken control, so hopefully it's going to work all right. So yes, just to continue on, so looking at that range of more than 60 organizations who participated in this study, and these were a very diverse range of organizations, this slide gives a bird's eye view of where cities and development agencies are focusing on with regards to climate resilient sanitation. So broadly, the slide shows that efforts to address climate change in urban sanitation are concentrated around the sector policy, strategy, and planning level, also on infrastructure and technology options, as well as aspects of service delivery and management. And then there is some focus on building institutional capacities, consideration of environmental aspects and the urban water cycle, as well as coordination amongst different agencies within countries and cities. And lastly, this study revealed emerging but limited efforts towards monitoring, evaluation, and learning for continual adaptation, financing mechanisms, including at the national and local level, as well as engaging with users and strengthening accountability mechanisms. So this is how the IPCC, the latest definition of the IPCC report, how it defines resilience. And we wanted to show it here just to focus, while that first aspect, which talks about the capacity of systems, so social, economic, and ecological systems to cope with the hazardous event, as well as responding or reorganizing in ways that maintain their essential function. That is a very important aspect, but it's also an additional aspect of this definition talks about looking forward and maintaining that capacity for continuous learning and adaptation. And this is what this topic really grapples with, the uncertainty that climate change brings and how we can adapt so that systems and services continue to provide services more sustainably. So the study was guided by the following framework, which include 4 main focus areas that are important to have for climate resilient sanitation. So the first one at the top on the left is in relation to institutions, policy, and planning. And it focuses on the need to have better risk-informed and vulnerability-informed planning, the need to have leadership and political will to take sanitation seriously. Then secondly, in terms of finance, we need financing across the whole sanitation chain. So from the household level all the way to the treatment or reuse process. And that we also need finance that is both for preventive actions as well as for disaster response. Then the third point in terms of infrastructure and service delivery, we need to have the right balance of having robust systems and also repairable systems. And then we also need to pay focus and attention on the operators of these different systems and how they can cope with different events that might create uncertainties and different circumstances that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And finally, the fourth area relates to user engagement. And users are a very key part of the sanitation service chain, especially with on-site systems, and they play a very important role in the delivery of the service. So we need to build more awareness. They need more early warning systems as well as capacity to respond to various disaster events. So moving on, we wanted to share, we heard from a lot of organizations who are leading the work on this topic, and there was a lot of good practice that emerged. So with regards to institutions, policy, and planning, we heard countries that are working on building political commitments towards sanitation-related climate mitigation efforts. And then we also heard countries who are working on institutional reform to integrate sanitation, climate, and disaster response. So actors in Bangladesh working on that point. And then we also heard from countries who are incorporating climate risk considerations while planning for their sanitation decision-making processes. Then next, in terms of financing, we saw efforts by WASH stakeholders engaging with climate finance actors to highlight the specific needs of urban sanitation. And we also saw initial efforts underway to explore the use of carbon credits in reducing emissions from sanitation. And then countries are also working with utilities within cities who are factoring in the costs of climate risks while upgrading their infrastructure. So those are some of the aspects that incorporate that adaptive financing in sanitation planning. Then thirdly, with regards to infrastructure and service provision, we heard on the use of GIS tools to predict climate risks and also adapt urban planning processes, including sanitation. Countries, so India is working on incorporating user experiences while scheduled desludging and incorporating climate risks within that in flood-prone areas. And then we also heard from countries who are providing good and safe on-site sanitation services in order to prevent groundwater contamination. And finally, with regards to the important point on user engagement, we saw a few organizations who are working. This is a very nascent area of work, but a few organizations have started to, for example, explore communication strategies at the community level to build awareness about climate risks to sanitation. We saw countries who are incorporating user experiences while designing climate resilient toilet infrastructure. And finally, we also heard from organizations who are exploring the potential of involving users and local associations for data collection on climate impact. So for example, in urban slum areas or informal settlements. And this kind of local level data on climate impacts can be used in local government decision making and to plan sanitation interventions. And finally, we would like to leave you with a quote from one of the study research participants, which we found quite interesting. And it talks about that we can't have a blueprint of what makes things resilient, but we actually need people to be critically analyzing their situation and tailoring responses to their experiences. And this is much less about prescriptive infrastructure management, but more about adaptive analysis and how to implement climate change adaptation. So really bringing that understanding of no one size fits all when it comes to climate change adaptation measures, and how that is the one thing that we need to keep in mind when we are designing adaptation efforts. And with that, I'll hand over to Juliet, who will take us to the next part of the presentation. You're on mute, Juliet.
Thank you. You'll have seen there that Zambia featured multiple times, and I think that's a lot of credit should go to GIZ for the work that you've done there. It's definitely a country where GIZ has really driven excellent action on climate resilient urban sanitation. So the final section of this presentation is about the knowledge and learning agenda. A warning that some of the slides ahead are a little bit dense, and I'm just going to highlight a few of the topics, because in the end there were so many areas that people felt that we need better evidence or ways of sharing, and so as a result there's quite a lot that you'll see on these slides. So first of all, we broke the knowledge and learning agenda into 6 different types of knowledge and learning, because not all evidence and not all questions are equal. And so some of the areas that people participating were interested in are really just about key topics to facilitate exchange. And for instance, that would be the perfect area for SuSanA as a learning platform to be facilitating discussions on the kinds of topics that arose in that area. Equally, local level data collection by government and implementers is a different kind of set of data and knowledge that's needed for planning local responses and adaptations. Combined implementation and research initiatives is really a call out to say, can we work better across the research community and implementation community, given that we need rapid learning cycles on what works? And then at the bottom here, we have that there's different forms of evidence that are needed to inform policymakers, or equally to convince policymakers of the need to invest in climate resilience. And finally, a set of evidence gaps that are more conducive to academic research and might have a longer term time frame in terms of resolving some of the questions in this area. So if we look at the kinds of topics that came up, and as I said, I won't speak to each point here, but evidence to convince policymakers is very much around having data and numbers, hard numbers of people affected, numbers of people exposed to climate hazards, numbers of people with poor sanitation. This is the kind of evidence that is needed to garner support for climate resilient sanitation. And for policy development, better understanding, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, understanding the costs is a real gap and was perceived to be a challenge. So can we collect better data around what the costs are going to be to finance climate resilience? Moving on to topics that would be feasible for combined implementation and research. There's a whole range of different topics here. One I'll draw your attention to is the idea of implementing adaptation responses and doing action research around that to understand the effectiveness of those responses. Because at the moment, there is virtually no evidence or evaluations of adaptation response, and we don't really know what the most cost-effective or the most effective approaches are. Another area could be in the area of monitoring climate resilience and trialling different frameworks for monitoring and tracking resilience. For local level data collection, things like information about flood predictions, things around the experience of community members that you heard the example that Avni provided. This is the type of local level data collection that could be done to help inform local responses. And then the academic research questions, again, many of them, things about looking at the urban water cycle as a whole rather than urban sanitation in isolation, things about the coping strategies of service providers, what are some of the strengths and responses that we can build on, and not just assume that we don't have even a starting point. Often people are adapting or are coping in different ways, and what can we learn about how they naturally try to cope to build from that. And lastly, sharing experiences across countries. Here, for instance, one of the topics at the top here was that being able to share how different countries are handling the institutional silos challenges and how to enable better cross-sectoral coordination. And that could be between sanitation and urban development, sanitation and agriculture, sanitation and climate, or sanitation and disaster management. There are so many different cross-sectoral linkages that play out differently in different country contexts, but could be an area of learning between countries. So lastly, the actions that the report calls for, firstly, for all of us to engage with climate policy and better coordinate with urban resilience and some of the other sectors, such as the ones I just mentioned. The second action, which is about shifting and at the same time testing and evaluating new policy and practice to incorporate climate risks and resilience. The third one, which is about consolidating and continuing to build the evidence base. As you saw, there are so many unanswered questions that we need to be working on. And lastly, that we need rapid learning routes, so cycles. So to facilitate rapid learning and capacity building, developing courses so that we have economies of efficiencies around sharing material for, say, new graduate students, staff of different organisations, etc. And that brings us to a close. So we'll provide you with the link to the report, and there's also some related research on climate resilience that we are also able to share. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Juliet and Avni, for this very comprehensive presentation. Also, we are good with the time. We still have 5 minutes for questions. I do not see any questions on the chat. So if you have spontaneous questions, please raise your hand. And as usual, it always takes a little bit of time. So yeah, I do have a question, which is basically what is next? What are the interventions that are being planned following up the development of this and the publication of this paper? Are the stakeholders that have been involved in the creation of this publication planning to do something in the direction of the recommendation you mentioned?
I'll just answer quickly, and then I see we do have a question, so that's good to see. So in follow-up, so similar to this meeting, we've been doing, I guess, sessions with various different organisations to help people engage with the report. We know that reports often sit on shelves rather than get discussed or built upon. So we hope that within GIZ you can continue a conversation about which of these actions, which of these areas do you see yourselves as being best able to contribute. And there is an emerging coalition on climate resilient sanitation, which Alexandra and others have been attending meetings, which is really about advocacy and prioritisation within the climate realm to make sure that sanitation is represented, and with kind of downstream aims around increasing financing, including climate financing for sanitation, and also looking at the question of systematising knowledge and knowledge exchange and capacity building. So that coalition will organise both joint efforts and also try and ensure that there's coherence and coordination amongst the different organisations who are involved. Maybe I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So this is a coalition at the global level, if I understand. Can you just mention maybe the partners that are involved in it? I guess GIZ and SuSanA. Yeah, that's a given.
SuSanA. Yep. So it's also so it built from a group which had organised a few Stockholm sessions over the last years, which include UNICEF, UN Habitat, and WHO. World Bank, ADB have also joined. There's some private sector organisations involved, such as Lixil. There's the Container-Based Alliance. And so at the moment, there's about 18 members who have said that they would like to take part in that kind of joint action. But it's very much at the global level. So I think with all of you, I'm sure many of you are based in countries, thinking about how to articulate global level efforts and advocacy with the country levels. It would be good to hear thoughts on how to best facilitate that, so that the global level doesn't end up just being in its own little cloud that has no relevance or impact on the ground in the countries, which is really where the impact we would want to see.
Yeah, that's always the risk.
Yeah.
Robert, I see that your hand is raised.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this very, very comprehensive study, and always a challenge to digest it and then get the good question out. But I see we have really lots of in-country experts here in the room, so maybe some of them might raise as well some questions. For me, to out myself, I'm not the sanitation expert. Maybe two questions. One, playing with resilience and adaptation. Knowing resilience is kind of the status we want to achieve in the long future, being resilient against climate change hazards, and then adaptation, the way towards this. More on a general scale, would you say the adaptation needed in the sanitation sector, is this more kind of small step adaptation which might be done to get to resilient sanitation status? Or if you look across the different countries you investigated in, is it more kind of you need to revolutionize sanitation system, the full infrastructure, the way it is? It does not help to do some small scale adaptation if there's a big, I don't know, hurricane. If you have these flood storms, it's not done with small adaptation. You really need to do it completely differently. So this would be the first question. And the second one, you had now these action pathways for the four main fields of action. Now, from a policy advice, you might need to focus on one. Where do you see is the biggest action or gap needed? Is it more kind of this institutional level? You need the better coordination. Is it the big finance gap? Or is it maybe there is finance, but we just don't know how to use it? Is it, and this links maybe again to the first question, is it really more on the infrastructure scale? Do we need better solutions to implement? Or is it the way we engage with the user? So which of these four fields do you see is the most important, and where maybe are solutions, but maybe just not used that far? Thank you.
Question. Fantastic. Well, I'm happy to jump in, and Avni, if you want to add, that would be great. So on resilience and adaptation, I guess first to say resilience, there is such a debate and argument about whether resilience is a condition that helps you cope with climate events, or whether it's the endpoint, as you described, that adaptation helps you get to. There's no agreement on that in any of the climate change literature, but there are those two ways of thinking about it. And in terms of incremental steps and adaptation versus revolutionize, I actually think depending on where, we need one or the other. I think there are major issues in using on-site systems in very dense, waterlogged areas that and are unsealed systems. And here I feel like we need revolutionize. We don't just need emptying and business models around emptiers. We really may need to rethink, because we cannot protect public health if we're letting pathogens spread everywhere every time it rains, and that we know that those events will continue. In other places, incremental may be fine. It may be smaller risks that we're dealing with, or less certain predictable risks, and we don't want to make a big transformation based on some uncertain climate prediction. So I think we need both. And again, in the literature on climate change adaptation, there's at the moment a lot of discussion saying we've been too focused on incremental change, and actually we need something that's called transformative adaptation. And the last IPCC report discusses that idea, which is more at the revolutionize, that we need to recognize we'll get to the limits of adaptation, and rather than, you know, in 10 years getting to that limit, we need to see that now and do something quite different. So I hope that's some kind of insight on that question. And if I had to choose on the different policy directions, I think for sanitation, it would just be, and this is not even to do with climate resilience, having a clear institutional mandate. I think until we have a ministry or a responsible, I think even if we have financing, we can't spend it well. Even if we have climate resilience plans, there's no one there who's got the actual mandate and responsibility to implement them. So I feel like that's, to me, that's the biggest starting point that we need to be working on. And it's there in some countries now. It's things have really changed, and in others we're a long way off. We're scattered between, you know, 5 ministries and no one really caring. So, Avni, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah. Just to add to that, on your second question, I also agree with Juliet. I think a lot of people in the study as well talked about that missing kind of building block of like a strong institutional ownership or accountability at a national level. And also like the sanitation sector needs to like talk to urban planners, needs to talk to climate people. So, you know, when you're planning for sanitation, are you accounting for what happens if there's a climate hazard? And, you know, so those coordination amongst different agencies is often missing, which is what kind of deters the adaptive planning and, you know, decision making.
Thank you so much. Robert, are you happy with the...
More than satisfied for the complex question. Very good answer. Thank you.
Great. Yes, thank you so much. It was great to have both of your insight on the topic. Great to have some experts speaking, sharing their work on the academic level. That's also something that sometimes it's lacking at the implementation side. I guess we contributed a little bit to bridging that gap. And yes, we are running out of time, but I think we still have 1 or 2 minutes for Robert and the steering group to maybe close the session. I think it was great, this 45-minute session. If you want my 5 cents on it, I think it's a great format, and I highly encourage you to repeat the experience. So Robert, I hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks again, Juliet and Avni and Alexandra, for organizing this. Very great having you here, and I agree, we like as well the 45-minute session. And so I will stop as well with the 45. Just maybe two words. And again, I think we really have a lot of people from our project, so I hope this was helpful for you. So there is no headquarter over balance this time in this session, which is really nice. Just maybe to Mark, and I see we have a final hand, so maybe Niels, you can even come up in the end. Just to say, we're planning a few more kind of topic-specific sessions, one on climate resilient design measures. So this is what you, Mark, a bit like the infrastructure part. One more, a call for water demand during a period of climate crisis, a virtual discussion where we want to bring different projects together to discuss their experiences. And the last one more focusing on the aspect climate risks assessment, how to understand and how to work with indicators. And we do this as well as a call for projects to come up. If you have to bring up your experience to one of these fields, you're very happy to come back to Diana or me or the other members of the steering committee, and we will organize your inputs for these sessions. And now I see that Niels is very keen and having a final question. For me, it's fine if we let you in. And from my side already, thank you for...
Thanks, Robert. And dear colleagues, not that much a question, but just to show my face here, because some of the colleagues already do know me, Robert, for example, and Mintje. I'm a newcomer to the water community, but I just wanted to announce here that I took over recently a new project on circular economy in urban water management systems here in Morocco, where actually the focus is to integrate options and water management options into urban planning and urban development systems, planification tools. So the strong linkage between water and urban, and as well for sure climate topics. So you might see my face more often from now on, and I'm just wanted to let you know that this new project it does exist, and yes, I'm the new AV for that one. So happy to cooperate with you in the close future. Thanks.
Thanks for joining. We'll come back to you and listen to your experience as well. Okay, with this, thanks all for joining. I hope your coffee is still hot. Juliet, Avni, thanks again for this good presentation, and have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.
Bye.